Good evening, Professor Brown. Me, Juan, Robin, and Duana worked diligently on the Vietnamese cultural influence in New Orleans, and this is what we based our project on. So, to describe the group, they identified themselves as Vietnamese or Vietnamese American in the U.S. The main language that's spoken in Vietnam is Vietnamese, especially in the household among the elders. Uh, that they try to pass on, like, to the younger generations, but in the U.S. they tend to speak English first rather than Vietnamese. Uh, the religious affiliation that is predominant in Vietnam and especially in New Orleans is Catholicism and Buddhism. The first generation is normally strong to their home roots, uh, especially when it comes to the grandparents and the great grandparents of families that are still living. Um, and they use their cultural experience, such as the Vietnam War and migration and the adaptive characteristics that they have to influence who their identity is. As I was talking about place-based identity. Characteristics of Vietnamese people and their culture is that they are very family centered and influenced by their family. So normally, it's seen that the youngest take care of the elders when they get old and can't work and retire. Um, Also give them a lot of respect. You even see like siblings. The older sibling gets a lot of respect, and they normally call it "chi" as a term of endearment. Oh, they're really big on community organizations. So, for example, we'll talk about this later in the PowerPoint, but they have the Tet Festival and the Mid Autumn Festival here in New Orleans that is Vietnamese based, and it's a huge, extravagant event for to show Vietnam culture and be prideful. And they're also really hardworking people. So, as of 2020, we've seen that Vietnamese people have become the largest Asian subgroup in the greater New Orleans area, holding at least 2.7%, 2.75% of the population in the parish. Uh, a lot of the Vietnamese population are homed in the East, holding at least 30% of the population there. And from the 1980s to 2010s, the population of Vietnamese people has almost doubled in New Orleans, as you see in the graph. They have the different parishes, and how the blue is showing how much is the Vietnam population in that parish. So, other Vietnamese cultural influences that are in New Orleans, and with this, you would like to think about the French, the Creole and Vietnamese fusion that is when it comes to food and different events. Um, Look at, for example, Vietnam was colonized by the French at one point in history. So that's where they get a lot of their some of their food seasonings is based off of from the French people. Uh, but you can see in dishes like banh mi and pho that's predominant in New Orleans. My favorite banh mi. Like, I'm a banh mi brothers person. And like I was saying, other influences include the religious symbols, such as the temples we talked about earlier in the presentation, the Tet Festival, which also includes Vietnamese food and fireworks, and different styles of dances. And I found this interesting, such as called Ao Dao. I don't know if I'm saying that correct, but that is AODAO. And you can see here in the first slide, this is their dresses, and this is how they dance for that event. And also the Mid-Autumn Festival, as I talked about also earlier in the presentation, which includes mooncakes, lanterns, and a ton of family events. Viet traditions include ancestor worship, where they praise their bloodline before them and how much they've grown as people and culture. And as we talked about earlier, there's high respect for elders in the family. Like I said, the youngest tend to take care of the elders out of respect. Also, wedding and funerals are huge in Viet culture. They have huge festivals and dances and all types of different food there. It's fun. I've seen a couple of videos online, and it looks way better than a traditional American wedding, if you ask me. And their meals their meals are normally shared in family settings and include spring rolls, pho, and rice cakes. More core Viet values, as I talked about earlier: loyalty and care for the family. Family is priority, and people, the family tends to stick together in hard and good times, and take care of each other financially, emotionally, and whatever the works. The respect's a huge thing in the family, especially when it comes to age and status hierarchy, such as occupations or financial means. Spirituality and traditions is huge in Viet values, as we talked about the festivals and Catholicism and Buddhism, Buddhist temples that are in New Orleans and Vietnam, and the cultural modesty, how they're very humble people and hard workers. Strengths and resilience mechanism that is in the Viet culture include adaptive culture, due to a large amount of the population becoming refugees during war and the trauma they experience. Cultural pride is huge in the culture, as we talked about the food festivals and also storytelling and folklore that are passed down to the younger generations. And religious community promotes community and collective being. Vietnamese oppression in society is has been going on for a very long time. America treated Vietnamese foreigners pretty roughly, especially during after the Vietnam War times, as you can tell. Obviously, because we lost the war, and it created a lot of prejudice with the Viet people. And competitions between Viet and black communities started to become fierce, causing a lot of strain between relationships. And the Vietnamese also felt in New Orleans, especially, that they had a lack of their voice in the city council and leadership in the community. And we'll talk about that more later in the presentation. Cultural impressions include the Viet's traditions, languages, and their institutions of education, like we talked about earlier, how they have a high respect for education, and they also have a high respect for leaders, healthcare workers, and any other people in those sorts of fields, helping the community out. And we talked about, again, Catholicism and Buddhism practice in New Orleans. They've seen a lot of economic oppression during the BP oil spill, and I don't want to get too deep into the BP oil spill, but as y'all know, or as you know, Professor Brown, that it really caused a lot of economic hardship with people in New Orleans and the Gulf Coast area, and especially with the Vietnamese people. It was hard for them to rebuild the seafood industry during the BP oil spill, especially with leftover residues that's still in the ocean. Also, it was hard for them to rebuild after Katrina because they started to gentrify their neighborhoods and show neglect towards the group. So, psychological and emotional oppression the Viet people has went through is fleeing for war, as we talked about, how a lot of the most of the country had to become refugees, and the trauma they faced had to go through grief and loss. Stigma and mental health also passed down as well because it started getting embedded in people. And with people becoming new in these areas, it was hard for them to adjust to the new American culture due to language barriers and limited transportation, especially for elders. That's why you tend to see more of the younger Viet people uh, speak English before their grandparents and parents because they were more embedded to the American culture than they were. Strength and resilience through the Vietnamese community. The Vietnamese community has gained recognition as a very strong community, as at least in New Orleans area, growing in years, especially suffering through challenges like Hurricane Katrina. Although no one noticed it in the beginning response, the community mobilized fast through local churches and was able to construct their homes and businesses. Faith is one of the biggest strengths, not only religious faith, but also faith in one another. The Catholic Church is also a large organization for Vietnamese people that not only provides services during worship, but also coordinates aid for classes and community planning. Youth and leadership is on the increase in the Vietnamese population as we look at groups like VELA as people are engaging in civic acts, voter registration, and environmental justice. Pride in culture and dissent. I'm sorry. Strong family bonds and good leadership have enabled the Vietnamese community to live and prosper regardless of the challenges posed by racism and displacement. So some community resistance seen in the Vietnamese people in New Orleans is most of them moved to New Orleans East after the Vietnam War. During that time period, the Vietnamese also experienced racism, poverty, and language barriers, as we talked about earlier. Support systems were built for Vietnamese people, such as the Mary Queen Church. And as we talked about earlier, how they lacked or felt like they lacked a voice in the community, they started to have protests in landfills, and the protest was successful and closed down. Legal safeguards that are aids for the Vietnamese community include the Refugee Act, and it had them receive access to housing, employment, and educational opportunities. Discrimination is also guarded by the laws of the Civil Rights Act. Laws of Civil Rights, Vietnamese businesses are supported by strong and local networks within the community. Cultural events help maintain traditions and pass them on to younger generations, as we talk about the Tet Festival and the Mid-Autumn Festival and the folklore passed down to the young generations. And youth group lead voters drives and civic engagement efforts have also increased protection for the Vietnamese people, like VELA. These activities protect cultural identity and strengthen community unity. Churches also provide more than spiritual guidance, providing assistance and services to the Vietnamese communities, as we talked about the last slide. For the future of Vietnamese people in New Orleans, as we discussed as a group, is climate change and racism continue to impact the community in the Vietnamese population. I'm sorry, I'm tired. Reminding us that the fight for justice is far from over. However, there is a growing sense of hope as a new generation of youthful leaders rises to meet the challenges. These leaders are dynamic, informed, and deeply engaged with the world around them. Organizations like VELA, as we talked about earlier, are playing a vital role in these movements by training and empowering young activists, preparing them to lead with purpose and conviction. As society becomes increasingly political, we are witnessing more young people stepping into roles of influence and advocacy. Their resilience, energy, and vision offer a powerful reminder that the future is in capable hands. And this is my group's resources. Some more resources. And that is the end of our presentation. And so I would also like to discuss, to indulge more in how the Vietnamese culture is very, how Vietnamese culture influenced New Orleans in a number of different ways. I mean, we talked about the foods, the festivals, we talked about younger advocacy groups growing in New Orleans, them coming together as a people and growing and organizing. And it created a lot of more businesses, more acceptance, and a larger population, as we've seen in the charts in New Orleans. And I think we should all take a moment to be thankful and take extra time into visiting Vietnamese culture, especially when it comes to food out here. I mean, come on, we're in New Orleans. But yeah, that was my group's presentation, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to present to you, sir. And thank you, Juan, Robin, and Dewana for the hard work and the communication. And yeah, that's our presentation.